Yes, the title is a clickbait. I would not like to believe that a party and a sort of party inside closed doors can determine the selection of a member in the playing 11 of a cricket team. But we do know that it's not just under Dhoni's captaincy, but under a lot of captains, there have been players who've been selected and dropped regardless of their performances. And that's exactly what we're going to do with some of the players that have made headlines over the years, taking MS Dhoni's name and see if they were warranted to be dropped or not. Now, before we talk about the likes of Virender Sehwag, Gautam Gambhir, Irfan Pathan, who's made headlines recently, and even someone like a Manoj Tiwary, hit that subscribe button. And for those of you guys who don't know already, we do have memberships open and a little trailer for you from our first video.
He also happened to be India's first Test centurion overseas, where he scored 112 at Old Trafford in 1936.
Ranji, who was a prince back then, was known to be one of the finest batsmen of all time until that point. Not only in terms of the way he batted and his style, but also because of the strokes that he brought into the game. Something that was very ungentlemanly back then was the leg glance, and that is something he really used to score a lot of runs.
Duleep Singhji scored 254 not out in just 4 hours of batting, which at the time was also a record for the highest score in the Fenner's ground.
Before we get into the crux of it and the meaty players that you're here for, something to keep in mind is, of course, we're not talking about every player that have been picked and dropped under MS Dhoni's captaincy, and we are only going to talk about a few names. But to start off with, let's talk about the player who MS Dhoni took over the captaincy from, and that's Rahul Dravid. MS Dhoni was appointed the ODI captain of the Indian team on 29 September 2007. Now, if you look at someone like a Rahul Dravid, he played 345 ODI games with over 10,000 runs, with an average of 39 and a strike rate of 71. It's not the most impressive ODI numbers, but if you look at the fact that he has more than 10,000 runs, it says something. But even someone like a Rahul Dravid, in the latter half of his career, especially the end, he was someone who would always be in and out of the ODI squad. But his form was on a decline, especially when MS Dhoni took over the captaincy for the Indian team. Because under MS Dhoni, Rahul Dravid played 17 matches, scored just 355 runs with an average of 23 and a strike rate of mere 70. These numbers are not impressive at all. In 2007, Rahul Dravid was dropped in the middle of an Australia series, where in that series he only averaged 10.2. But he once again made a comeback in 2009 because India was heading into a Champions Trophy with a relatively young squad, and the Indian management thought someone like a Rahul Dravid will be fit for the squad because of the experience that he has. But even the 2009 season wasn't impressive at all for him. Across 6 innings, Rahul Dravid just averaged 30, and after the Champions Trophy, which was disappointing in itself, he was dropped once again. Now, after he got dropped in 2009, it wasn't the biggest of surprises when you did not see Rahul Dravid in the 2011 World Cup squad. What was a lot more surprising is the fact that after the World Cup, when India went to England and played the Test series, there was an ODI series to be played after too, in which Rahul Dravid was surprisingly picked once again after a hiatus of 2 years from this format. And this was especially because of how disappointing the Test series was. The only man to score any kind of runs was Rahul Dravid, and so the Indian team once again thought having Dravid in the side will help with experience playing in England. But this was the series where Rahul Dravid took upon himself to retire from the format. His reasoning for this was he did not want to take a youngster spot and was anyway satisfied that he was not playing the ODI format to begin with. And this is where you see Rahul Dravid's ODI career come to an end. Was it MS Dhoni's decision to drop him? We'll never know because he's never talked about it, but was it warranted? Absolutely. Now, interestingly, in the same time period between 2007 and 2009, there was someone else who scored more than 10,000 runs in this format who was dropped under MS Dhoni. This man has played 311 matches in the ODI format for the Indian team, scoring 11,000 runs with an average of 41 and a strike rate of 73. Of course, I'm talking about Sourav Ganguly. Now, of course, we're not going deep dive into these individual careers. If you want a video on that, let us know. But Sourav Ganguly has 22 hundreds in the ODI format. But what is mind-boggling is the fact that his last 100, his 22nd 100, came in 2003 against Kenya. And it's mind-boggling because he played 4 more years after this. From that 100 to his last game, Sourav Ganguly played 83 matches for the Indian team, where he averaged 35 and had a strike rate of 70 and had 22 50s in this period and 0 hundreds. And under the captaincy of MS Dhoni, Sourav Ganguly only played 9 games with an average of just 27 and a strike rate of 74. For an opener, even though Sourav Ganguly had done a lot for Indian cricket, these numbers weren't all that impressive and something to hold on to, especially with the 2011 World Cup coming up. Sourav played that one extra series after Rahul Dravid was dropped against Australia in 2007 and then was dropped right after. But mind you, all of these dropping and changing did not come at ease, because dropping Rahul Dravid and Sourav wasn't the easiest things to do at that time. And so the media, of course, questioned the management and questioned why this was happening to begin with. And MS Dhoni had one simple answer, and for a lot of years he held on to this answer, and it's the fact that they wanted to improve the standard of fielding. And with these players, especially when they were coming to the end of their career, MS Dhoni thought these guys were a liability on the field. And now this is where we come to someone a little younger, someone who's always made headlines whenever he has talked about MS Dhoni, and that's Gautam Gambhir. He played a match-winning knock in the final of the 2011 World Cup, and he was one of the reasons for why India went on to win that World Cup. But his career didn't last very long after. He did miss a couple of series after the World Cup because he was going through an injury, but he did play a couple of series before that infamous tri-series against Australia and Sri Lanka. I call it infamous because this is where the rotation policy of the openers was introduced. Now, to explain what the rotation policy is simple. According to MS Dhoni, every player needed to get a chance before the final of the tri-series tournament, so that if one of them did get injured, the other person had game time in them to replace the injured opener and to score a lot of runs. In other words, he wanted to give youngsters a chance to be able to fit in that playing 11 and get game time. In much more simpler words, this was his way of making sure the seniors were slowly but surely getting pushed out of the team before the 2013 Champions Trophy. I don't say this with surety, but if you look at the trend, it almost seems like MS Dhoni had made his mind in terms of which player he wanted and did not. Of course, keep in mind that this is complete speculation, but look at the trends yourself and tell me I'm wrong. Now, in the Indian squad announced in the tri-series against Australia and Sri Lanka, the Indian team had three openers. We had Sachin Tendulkar, Virender Sehwag and Gautam Gambhir. And MS Dhoni had to make sure that in every game, regardless of the performances, the openers were being rotated so as to give a chance to the other players sitting outside. And this is exactly what we saw, because in India's campaign in the tri-series, India went on to play 8 games and we saw 5 different opening pairs. What was astonishing to a lot of people is that in the third and the fourth game, Gautam Gambhir did get a chance to open. In the third game, he scored 92 while opening with Sehwag, and in the fourth game, he scored 91 while opening with Sachin. After which he opened with Sachin one more time, but the 3 games that followed after that, he was the number 3 batter while Sehwag and Sachin opened. Which is what surprised a lot of people, because these changes and rotation policy did not make any sense, because Sachin and Sehwag weren't scoring a lot of runs, and the one opener who was getting a score was either getting dropped or was being pushed down the order. Now, the rotation policy itself was getting criticized all over. But when you now come back to Gautam Gambhir, the opener, after this tri-series, he went on to play 16 consecutive games as an opener until he got dropped forever. In these 16 games, he had an average of 33, had 200s and 350s. Objectively, as an opener, these weren't the most impressive numbers, but by no means were they bad. But of course, with the likes of Shikhar Dhawan and the experiment of Rohit Sharma as the opener, even though Gautam Gambhir did play that last over before the 2013 Champions Trophy, and the Champions Trophy squad was announced, Gautam Gambhir was not in the squad. And in retrospect, when you look at the Champions Trophy and how Shikhar and Rohit Sharma performed as openers, you would think that it was the right call. Of course, the second opener in all of this was Sachin Tendulkar, who retired soon after his 100th 100. And the third opener in all of this, Virender Sehwag, was a simple case of losing out of form, because he scored that massive 219 runs against the West Indies, but after which he did not get a big score at all. In 11 innings, he had an average of just 22, in which he only had 150. And by the end of those matches, he was dropped once again. Was MS Dhoni right to drop Virender Sehwag? For sure, because if you look at MS Dhoni's perspective, Sehwag was struggling to get a big score. He already talked about how the seniors in the squad were struggling and were a liability on the field. And if you look at MS Dhoni's interviews and the way he talks about players, he really wanted a young squad going into the Champions Trophy in England. And that's exactly what he got. Now, the names that I just talked about are almost understood. They've always been in the headlines, and they are someone who talks about MS Dhoni in relation to their career. But a player who sparked up a lot of controversy recently, something he also cleared on Twitter. The interview was from a lot of years ago, but he was talking about how he was dropped in 2009. What is very interesting is if you look at Irfan Pathan's career, he gets dropped twice, once in 2009 and then in 2011. It almost makes no sense when you look at his perspective. We're not going into him getting dropped in 2009 a lot, because again, he does come back and play for the Indian team. But when he did get dropped in 2009, he has talked about when he had a chat with Gary Kirsten back then, it wasn't his call, and Irfan Pathan simply presumed that it was does MS Dhoni the captain's call because he is who makes the final 11. Of course, Pathan didn't like this because he and his brother had played match-winning knocks to save the Indian team even back then. But right, he does get dropped but gets back into the Indian team in 2011. Now stick with me here because this is a massive chunk in this video, especially because we are going to go through his last 13 games and try and understand why was he dropped to begin with and if MS Dhoni's decision was right after all. Irfan Pathan comes back to play for the Indian team in December of 2011 against the West Indies. He didn't do much with the bat, but he did pick up 2 wickets, reducing West Indies for 23 for 2 in just 4 overs. Now India fly off to Australia where Irfan Pathan gets 4 games. Economically, Irfan Pathan in his first game did well. His bowling figures were 38 for 1, getting Dilshan out. He batted at number 9 and didn't contribute much with the bat. Then the next game he plays was a disaster for the Indian team because India gets all out for 178 against the Australians, where they scored 288 for 5. What is very fascinating is out of these 5 wickets, Irfan Pathan took 3 of them. His figures were 3 for 61 by the end of that match. He also scored 19 runs, but if you look at the scorecard, you will be surprised to know that he was the 3rd highest scorer. It was that bad for the batting unit for the Indian team. Now, objectively, these performances are great, so we continue. Now, in this game, India went on to lose, but Irfan Pathan almost won them the match. With the ball, he had figures of 2 for 54, but more importantly, with the bat, he scored 47 of just 34 balls. He was trying to finish off the game, except he lost out of partners and in the end couldn't do it for the team. Now the last game that he played in Australia in this series, we once again lost against the Australians, but this pitch almost seemed like a very spin friendly pitch because MS Dhoni only gave Irfan Pathan 5 overs. This was also one of those games where Sehwag went on to bowl 9 overs. In the 6 overs that Irfan Pathan did bowl, he gave away just 28 runs, and even with the bat he scored 22 of 22 balls. Now you see the trend here, don't you? After the series in Australia, Irfan Pathan then gets picked for the Asia Cup where he gets 5 wickets across 3 games. Now sure, in the last 2 games that he did play in the Asia Cup, he was a bit expensive, where in the one game he gave away 61 in 9 overs and in the other game he gave away 69 in 10 overs. Now good for Irfan Pathan because he continues to get picked for the Indian team because after the Asia Cup, India go to Sri Lanka to play a very long ODI series, where in 5 matches he gets 8 wickets. What's extraordinary is the fact that the last ever game that he plays for the Indian team, which is against Sri Lanka in this series, he got a 5 wicket haul. And what's more impressive is that in the 4 occasions that he did get to bat, he was not out in 3 of those occasions. Now look at this, right? Since Irfan Pathan's comeback in 2011, he played 13 games for the Indian team, just 13, after which he got dropped. But in these 13 games, he picked up 21 wickets with an economy rate of 5.4, which included a 5 wicket haul. And with the bat, more impressively, he averaged 29.3 with a strike rate of 97. The best job an all-rounder could do at that time for the Indian team. He was the perfect all-rounder. He was the perfect player to have in the middle with the bat and the ball. To give you a little perspective, India's want to have an all-rounder, a bowling all-rounder, a fast bowling all-rounder at that too, came in 2016 with Hardik Pandya. Now if you look at these numbers of Irfan Pathan in his last 13 games, there's absolutely no reason to drop him. But yes, you cannot forget those few things that did cause problems for Irfan Pathan. One of it was his pace. He was an express pace. In fact, he was hovering in the 120s, and that is something MS Dhoni did not like quite a bit, and he was vocal about how he really wanted fast bowlers. And not just this, Irfan Pathan throughout his career was always found with injuries. Now right after the series against Sri Lanka, Irfan Pathan did not find a place in the squad, but by the end of that year in 2012, he was again found with a knee injury. A lot of people might not even remember this, but Irfan Pathan was part of the Champions Trophy squad in 2013. He played a warm-up game against Sri Lanka where in 5 overs he gave away 45 runs for no wickets. He of course did not feature in any of those games and never played for the Indian team after that series against Sri Lanka. Now when you take a step back from all of this and when you look at if it was the right decision to drop Irfan Pathan, if you look at his performances and numbers, you would think not. The only thing you could possibly hold on to is the fact that he was in express pace, but he was getting the job done, if not with the ball, at least with the bat. But that's not even true with Irfan Pathan because he was doing the job with the ball and bat. So was it warranted for him to be dropped? Definitely not. But you can understand why the frustrations come out in these interviews when he looks back in his career, because he's also talked about how a lot of people's careers start at the age of 27 and get into their prime, but Irfan Pathan's career had ended unfortunately at the age of 27 and 28. late. This is also where we get into another interesting character who has been vocal about his feelings towards MS Dhoni, and that's Manoj Tiwary. He didn't have the best of starts to his ODI career, but in his 6th innings for the Indian team in the ODI format, he scored 104 not out. He was retired hurt against the West Indies in Chennai. Now again, it's an unfortunate story because after this 100, he was part of the Commonwealth Bank series and the Asia Cup, but did not play a single game. He then gets a series against Sri Lanka in 2012, where he scores 21 and 65. And imagine this, doesn't play for the Indian team until 2014. He has also been vocal about how there were certain players who for whatever reason didn't perform, but MS Dhoni continued to back them. Now of course, back then if you look at the scorecards, he was fighting for the middle order spot. Now some of the middle order batters were Virat Kohli, because at times he would bat at number 4, Rohit Sharma, Suresh Raina. Suresh Raina wasn't in the best of forms after the 2011 World Cup, but MS Dhoni continued to back him. And this is a trend that you see with a lot of captains, because a captain looks at a certain player and they have a tendency to be biased towards them and continue to back them regardless of their performances for a longer period of time as compared to someone else. And that is what you saw with MS Dhoni when he continued to back the likes of Rohit Sharma, Suresh Raina and even Virat Kohli at times. And unfortunately, this is where Manoj Tiwary missed out. Is he right to be angry? Maybe. Objectively, should he have been dropped? Unfortunately not. But when you look at captains and the way they select players, it is almost a given that there might be certain players who have performed but don't get a place because there is someone else with a lot more so-called potential, or someone who has proven to be a match winner in the past. Now in the time period of 2011 and the last game that Manoj Tiwary played in 2012, he only played 6 games, where he had an average of 49, which included 100 and 150 and a strike rate of 84.8. And when you look at Suresh Raina, Virat Kohli and even MS Dhoni, all of these guys played more than 25 games for the Indian team. But because they were also young and was part of the 2011 World Cup squad, it wasn't the biggest of surprises that Dhoni continued to back these guys. After all of this drama, Manoj Tiwary did get a game in 2014, and a year after, he was then selected once again to go to Zimbabwe to play against Zimbabwe in 2015. In all these 4 games in total, he did not get a big score and unfortunately never played for the Indian team once again. Now if you talk to someone like an MS Dhoni, I'm sure he would have his reasons to drop these certain players, but when you talk to these players, they would feel like they were treated unfairly. This video isn't about attacking a certain player or attacking a certain captain or the Indian management. It's just a perspective on how certain captains, and we've seen this all around the sport, not just in cricket but all over the world, how certain captains or coaches or the management favor a player because they see something in them that others may not see. Someone else's career or someone else's opportunity may get lost. And this video is an example of how certain players may have been warranted to be dropped and how certain players were just unlucky. If you have enjoyed this video, like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff. A reminder that we have started membership. If you haven't followed us on our socials, do that too. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.